So I gave myself a challenge this morning. Come up with 15 favorite Oilers. It's a challenge because as a Canuck fan, I've watched the Oilers run the Canucks either from the playoffs in the regular season where they just miss below the Oilers, or they're one of the teams that make it and the Canucks don't, and a team that just in general is beaten up on the Canucks pretty good over the many years I've watched hockey. And yeah, so coming up with the top 15 of my favorite guys, I go, yeah, I cheer for him right now. It can be somewhat difficult. So you may not see some big names. There's other reasons too. And with any of these lists, if you've been following, there are big names that get left off of lists. Like, I have to say that the one that when I did the Detroit players list said you didn't know Gordie Howe. I'm not that old. I didn't watch Gordie Howe. It has to be my favorite players that I've watched. You can't, to me anyways. Having a favorite player and saying that's my favorite player that played for this team, but you never actually watched him play is sort of like saying my favorite movie is The Godfather without actually having sat down and watched it. I know there's people that do that. I know there are. I've pretended I've watched movies just to get out of conversations. Hey, did you watch that movie? Yes. You seen White Chicks? Oh, yeah, uh-huh. Oh, man, did you like that part? Yeah, no, yeah, I saw it. Yeah, all right. I never saw it. All right, I'm not going to watch it. Number top. Okay, so top 15 Edmonton Oilers, and this was a challenge to come up with 15. Got to be honest. Number 15. Now I also had to put in some of the younger players where I've left off younger players on some of the other teams because I'm like, well, they wouldn't be my top 15 all time right now. But with the Oilers, it kind of yeah. We'll go through it. Number 15. Yeah, we'll start with him. Okay, stop going backwards. There we go. Todd Marchand. Marchand was a excellent penalty killer, fast player. During an era where the Oilers had no longer been a Stanley Cup contender, but Marchand still scared you. He was one of those forwards that did that for the Oilers. I actually really enjoyed that Oilers era after they weren't a dynasty anymore. There were some actually really good players on those teams. And it's obviously not going to be remembered as well as the dynasty, but there were some pretty darn good players, including Marchand. Number 14. Yeah, also from that era. So this is the second year of us having an It's All Your Fault award, thanks to CEO for the Oilers saying it was all Reeder's fault last year that the Oilers missed the playoffs. And if we went back far enough with that, Sean Horcoff would be the nominee a lot for the Oilers. And I thought it was unfair. I thought Sean Horcoff was a good player. I thought the expectation might have been a little bit high for him. But yeah, I definitely thought he was pretty decent. Then he played in Dallas, and I was like, yeah, he's a good player. I mean, is he overpaid? It probably, but I never understood the amount of blame that was thrown on Horcoff towards the end of his time there. So, all right, that's up to 14. At 13, like I said, there's going to be some younger players. Darnell Nurse. Darnell Nurse might be one of the most underrated defensemen in the NHL. The physicality, the offense, he's able to provide with that physicality. If the Oilers at any point in time said, you know what, I will trade Nurse, you'd have 30 general managers on the phone, 31 when Seattle comes in saying, what do you want for him? Darnell Nurse is an absolute beast on the ice, and I really honestly think I'd say 4 or 5 years from now, we'll be talking about not necessarily Norris trophies. I'm not going to go that far, but I think we'll be talking about how solid an all-around defenseman he is, and I think he's going to get paid handsomely over the years, and I think he'll be up there in the upper echelon of all-time Oiler defensemen. Speaking of which, Paul Coffey's not on this list. Coffey was never one of my favorite players. That's just, he's not there. So yeah, Nurse comes off the board, or off my book, onto the board. Number 12. And again, this has to be my favorite Oilers, right? So it's kind of like, yeah, I'll go with him at 12. Bill Ranford, who backstopped the Edmonton Oilers to the 1990 Stanley Cup. I don't know what to say about him other than, yeah, he was pretty darn good. Ranford left Boston to go to Edmonton. I mean, Boston came out of that with Andy Moog, which was pretty good for Boston, but Ranford turned out to be a pretty good goaltender as well. It worked out for both goaltenders. But Edmonton with that Stanley Cup win in 1990 over Andy Moog tells you they probably didn't regret that deal themselves. Number 11, Moog isn't on this list either because even though Moog was a goaltender I loved in Edmonton, I had him on the Boston list and I had him pretty high, so I left him off this list. That's one of the challenges I give myself, which is, oh, hey. And part of the reason I do that is because I don't want to get lazy with these lists where you can just go, it's Andy Moog again. Oh, it's Andy Moog again. Oh, there's Andy Moog again. So that's why I try to make sure I'm not using the same guys on two lists unless I have to. Unless this or it's a situation where I have something completely different to say about the guy the second time around. Number 11. Yeah, I'll put him at 11. We'll talk about players who played for the Oilers after their glory days. It's Doug Weight. And Doug Weight was an excellent player for the Oilers. Again, it's about guys who came to Edmonton and played when the Canadian dollar was really low, the team was having problems, and didn't complain. Doug Weight really wasn't a complainer that I can remember. And so, yeah, he definitely belongs on the board as one of my favorite Oilers. He, of course, came over from the Rangers while the Rangers were picking up as many Oilers as they could, and Weight turned out to be a pretty good addition for the Oilers. They didn't win a cup with him, but if they'd kept the players that they traded for Weight, you're not going to win a cup either. So, related note, Craig McTavish is not on the list. Didn't make the list. Although he was the last player to play without a helmet. So, you can look at that and say, wow, that's amazing. Last player without a helmet. Or what was he thinking when everybody in the league's wearing a helmet and not him? So, it depends on your point of view. Number 10. And I really, really do think when we talk about the Oilers' blue line, I think it gets over criticized. Oscar Klefbom's an excellent defenseman, and I do think that, again, much like Darnell Nurse, the longer his career goes, the more people are going to appreciate him. He's had injury problems that sideline him, but when he's out of the lineup, the Oilers really feel it. He plays, 23 minutes a night, 22, 23 minutes a night. And so when that's gone and he does a little bit of everything on the blue line, you miss that. You really do. And it's really hard to replace. So that's where a lack of depth probably shows up, but the actual defense itself in Edmonton, I think, gets too much flack. I've got two of their defensemen in my top 15 favorite players that have ever played for Edmonton. So, yeah, Klefbom at number 10. Number 9. Jari Kurri. From the Oilers dynasty, Jari Kurri was the best goal scorer that wasn't named Gretzky, with honorable mention to Mark Messier there as well. Jari Kurri, absolutely a fantastic goal scorer who knew where to be for Wayne. When Wayne and Jari lost each other and then they got each other back in LA, but it didn't quite work the same. It was actually kind of a sad thing, to be honest, because again, while I wasn't a fan of seeing them beat up on some of the teams that they did, because I wasn't a fan of the Oilers, especially towards the late 80s. Early 80s, as I was getting into hockey, that was some of the most entertaining sport anywhere that you could watch. Like, I want to say just not just NHL, but all sports. That Oilers team did some amazing things on the ice with the puck, and Jari Kurri was usually the one putting it in the back of the net if Gretzky didn't do it. So yeah, Jari Kurri, I'll throw him at number 9. Number 8. Now, Grant Fuhr is an interesting one. Grant Fuhr, I always liked Moog more than Fuhr. I always thought Moog was the better goaltender than Fear the whole time they were together in Edmonton. And the year that the Oilers ditched Moog in the minors and had Fear, that was a year that drove me nuts as a hockey fan. Again, I was very young. But, Grant Fuhr, as Bill Ranford took his job, we found out what a nice guy he was. Where some goaltenders might be all angry and might be, how dare this guy that while I'm not playing, he's out there taking my job. He was really nice about it. He was a really decent, down-to-earth guy. And I've never seen him in an interview at any point. I can't remember him being like angry or over the top, emotional. He seemed like a really nice, genuine, happy, down-to-earth guy. And so I can't not have Fear on the list. I can't. Obviously, if we were talking about, if he played for the Canucks, well, no, he wouldn't have been top 15, but this is Oilers, and it's a little bit of a different criteria to get on the top 15 for the Oilers. Number 7. There's a begrudging respect that I had for Messier, and so Messier has to be on the list. Now, as a Canuck, oh no, I wasn't a fan of Messier with the Canucks, but when he was with the Oilers, yes. Messier, I also remember, and this is one of those things that you sort of remember from watching hockey. I was about 14, I want to say. About 14 years of age, watching a hockey game, and Messier trips. Nobody touched him, and then there was a penalty called on the play for a guy for tripping him, and I went nuts. I remember freaking out like he dove. He dove. And there were things in Messier's game that would drive me nuts, again, watching teams that I cheered for against him. But his leadership, the fact that he was the captain when they won the Cup in 1990, the fact that they did that, a lot of that was around him. And after he did that, I think that's where he ends up going to the Rangers and doing that for the Rangers in 94, probably as a direct result of what happened in 90. Because they answered the question, can they win without Wayne? And it was yes, they could win without Wayne. Wasn't easy, but they did win without Wayne in 1990. So Messier, number 7. Number 6. Leon Draisaitl. I get a lot of comments about Draisaitl and why don't you like Leon? I don't know what people are talking about. I like Leon Draisaitl. I did a video last year on Leon Draisaitl after his 50-goal season. I think he is absolutely full value for his spot in the standings. I think he gets the Art Ross. Plus, I think he gets the Hart this year as well. Now, I'm not saying where my vote would go, but I think he's going to get both. Leon's really grown into one of the best players in the league, and he's been kind of fantastic. And he might have got to 50 goals again this year if we played a full 82-game schedule, which we understand now isn't going to happen, but, Draisaitl, one of my favorites. Number 6. Number 5... Kevin Lowe. Kevin Lowe, the stay-at-home defenseman on that top line. So you'd have Gretzky, Curry, Anderson. Glenn Anderson's not on the list. Just spoiler alert. Paul Coffey, and then Kevin Lowe. And poor Kevin Lowe would be the only guy on the ice even thinking about defense. Be the only one even kind of sort of thinking about it. And when all the Oilers left for money or for whatever reason they left Edmonton that, was kind of a tire fire at the time, Kevin Lowe never did. He stuck with the franchise. Now, he did go to the Rangers during that period there, but everybody went to the Rangers. So I'm not counting that because, everybody went to the Rangers. But Kevin Lowe, it never felt like he had to leave. And then when his career's over, he ends up back in Edmonton in a management role. And of course, people will talk about how he did in that management role, but it is hard to think of who Mr. Oiler might be and not go with Kevin Lowe. He leads them in all-time games played, and really, in all honesty, again, he was one of the last to still be there after that dynasty fell apart. Number 4. Yeah, now it gets really difficult. Okay. Esa Tikkanen. Tikkanen, to me, the things I remember most about Tikkanen from his time with the Oilers was just kind of doing funny stuff. When he went behind the Oilers, behind the Montreal net and took Brian Hayward's stick and tried to stick it inside of his jersey, and Hayward was walloping him with his blocker, and he went to the penalty box and he was laughing about it. That's Esa Tikkanen. When he's following Wayne Gretzky around the ice during the playoffs and talking to him in what they call Teakish, where nobody understands what he's saying, and he just kept on him and on him and on him to the point where Gretzky's yelling STFU at him from the Kings bench. That's Tikkanen. Tikkanen, he could get under everybody's skin, and he could score goals, and he could pass the puck, and he was a pretty good skater. Tikkanen was a lot of fun to watch, and he was an agitator, but he wasn't a Brad Marchand type agitator. He would just talk, and he was big on the whole let's talk to our opponent kind of thing. It drove them completely insane. You drive people completely, because again, you didn't understand what he was saying on the ice. Even his own teammates were like, I don't know. Essa came up and said something to me. I didn't have a clue what he said. I just kind of nodded and agreed with him. Nobody knew what he was saying. And I think that was part of his thing. I get the feeling that outside of the game, I picture him as this perfectly eloquent, almost like a James Bond type, maybe even with a British accent. I know he's from Finland, but come on, could anybody? We can all imagine this. And just being a completely eloquent gentleman outside of hockey. And then when he's playing hockey or he's doing interviews, no, can't understand a word. That's the way I picture it. So don't ruin it. Number 3. Ryan Smith. You talk about Mr. Oiler, it's Ryan Smith. You talk about a guy who's willing to cry when he leaves the Oilers. Real men are willing to show their tears, right, Ryan? And it became a thing, and I know that the Michael Jordan crying face is very common around the internet, but the Ryan Smith one was at one point too. And he wore his heart on his sleeve, and he was an Oiler. Even when he went to other teams, even when he was with the Kings, with the Islanders, didn't matter. We still went, you're supposed to be an Oiler. Oh, you're in Colorado? Yeah, you're supposed to be an Oiler. So the fact that he finished out his career as an Oiler, of course, because he had to. And when you look at their games played list, he's number 2 on the all-time Oilers games played list. So Ryan Smith, yeah, he was Captain Canada, of course, as well. And did a lot of wonderful things in the international game for the country, Canada. And so, yeah, number 3. Number 2. Probably one of the best all-around players in the game right now. And I say probably because if I say the best all-around player, the comment section is going to be riddled with people who say it. But the fact that I said one of, that means Oiler fans are going to be like, wait, what's he saying? Well, he does special things almost every time he's on the ice. I've talked about certain players being able to bring that game to the next level, and I think McDavid is the best example of that league-wide right now. And I think this is where, like, Draisaitl's got all the points and the goals, but there's just something special about McDavid. There's something different with McDavid. There's something consistently awe-inspiring with McDavid out there on the ice. And thanks to having this channel and being able to watch as much hockey as I do, and the fact that I watch games I would not have been watching 4 or 5 years ago, McDavid, every game does something that's special. Something that's really, really special. And it's part of the reason why when we're doing simulations on NHL 20, and I look and I go, oh, they've got 1 assist for McDavid in 3 playoff games against the Flames. And that's to me where the whole idea of simulating hockey becomes kind of weird, and it's not a system without a lot of flaws. Connor McDavid, there's no way that in 3 playoff games would have 1 assist. Just no chance. Not only that, but I thought maybe he was injured, because I was like, I don't remember seeing him with the puck a whole lot in the first 3 games, so I had to go look. But the real Connor McDavid in playoff series, we know at some point in time this kid has to get a Stanley Cup, which means that as long as he's an Oiler, it would happen in Edmonton. And we can all have the debate about which Canadian team's going to get to a Stanley Cup first, or if a Canadian team's ever going to win a cup again, because it's been since '93. But I don't think any of us would be surprised to hear the Oilers eventually do it, and Connor McDavid's the guy who scores the game winner in Game 7. I think once Crosby has wound down, which I think is going to be within at least the next 20 years, right? McDavid will be seen as the best player in the game. That's at least where I am with it. We'll see, but again, to me, McDavid's right there with Crosby right now. So number 1, and here's the weird thing. So it is impossible for me to make this list and not have Gretzky at the top of it. And yet, at the time, Gretzky, I wasn't a fan for a lot of it. I did have, though, there was an old 7-Up poster, and it had Gretzky in the middle. It had Carling Bassett on it. It had Bob Leonarduzzi on it. I want to say Dave Stieb and Steve Rogers were on it, too. I'm trying to remember who was on it, but I remember it was one of my favorite posters because it had Gretzky on it. Gretzky was probably the first hockey player who had big endorsement deals, and he was on commercials all over the place, and it was all right. And he had that in Canada, and then, of course, he goes to LA, and Americans realized how marketable he was and how down-to-earth he seemed to be. And yet, when he played for the Oilers, I mostly remember him for scoring a bunch of points and goals against Vancouver. It'd be like, oh, he needs a big goal. Oh, he's playing Vancouver next. It's going to happen there. Yeah, it's going to happen there. And it's just, when he passed Gordie Howe's mark, of course, against the Canucks. I think he had his 500th goal against the Canucks. His first ever NHL goal against the Canucks. So he really had an ownership over the Canucks that drove me insane as a Canucks fan. But when I look at the Oilers now, and if I'm saying, well, my 15 favorite Oilers of all time, I would have to have Gretzky at number 1. I have 3 Gretzky jerseys. I have 3. I have 1 with the Kings, and I have 2 with the Oilers, home and away. Because he was the most talented player I've ever seen play the game. And it's like, as the years have gone on, I've appreciated more and more looking in the rearview mirror what I saw with Gretzky. And I think we're going to see that with players who are fans right now who can't stand Sidney Crosby, and potentially people who don't like McDavid. We're going to see them as we get further removed from their careers, once they've retired and they moved on. People saying, they were really, really good, weren't they? I couldn't stand him when he was playing, but he was pretty darn good, and I got to give him that. So Wayne Gretzky's that for me, where I may not have been a big fan at the time, but when I look back now, I can't make this list and not have Gretzky at number 1. When I started watching hockey, he was the best player in the game. It was not close. There was Gretzky and there was everybody else. When they won their first Stanley Cup, yeah, I cheered. I thought it was great. The atmosphere in Northlands was electric, and a big part of that was 99. And so there's going to be players from that era, players who were in that dynasty, on the list. Because they kind of sort of have to be when I'm looking back now. And yeah, Gretzky was the best player I ever saw. Mario Lemieux, a close second, but Gretzky, best player I ever saw. And so he has to be number 1 on the Oilers list. So there you go. And he wasn't on the Kings list. And this is a big part of the reason he doesn't end up. And I wasn't a huge fan of him in LA either. So that's where, again, with these lists, it's going to be different. And I'm trying to make sure I don't repeat the same players more than once. So there's some Rangers you're not going to see. You're not going to see Messier. You won't see Lowe. You're Tikkanen. Who else? I think Curry played for the Rangers briefly, didn't he? Doug Waite was a Ranger. Yeah, there's a lot. And I'm trying to think with Todd Marchand. I don't think Marchand ever played for the Rangers. He may have. Anyways, yeah, there's a lot. There was a lot of overlaps between the Rangers and the Oilers in that era. And I guess Ryan Strome. So still. All right. Thank you guys so much for watching, for spending the time to watch this and hear my explanations. If you did, and if you just fast forwarded to the end, you're like, where's Paul Coffey? Yeah, he's not on the list. Thank you guys so much for watching, though, and for your support during this time. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video, and yep, 99's number 1, very predictable. But people might be surprised that I have McDavid so high up on the list, and I have Draisaitl at 6 as well. And there's others of the current Edmonton Oilers. I don't hate the team. I do. I like the team. They're fun to watch. Don't cheer for them against Vancouver, but they are fun to watch. Thank you guys so much for everything, and I will talk to you again soon.